She was abandoned as a baby, no name, no story, no bond. But what no one could have imagined is that destiny had hidden a message for her, a single proof that one day she was loved. And that message, that sign of a love the world tried to erase, was hidden in the only possession she had, in the simplest, most innocent object you can imagine. Inside that teddy bear, worn by time and nights of crying, there was a secret, a small device placed there with a hope that defied all logic. And it was like that, through a simple orphanage toy, that Sofia not only found a message, but discovered the way back to her mother. The home of hope was a place of contrasts. Its walls were colorful, painted with sunflowers and white clouds by well-meaning volunteers, trying to erase the coldness of the concrete. But behind those vibrant colors lay profound silences. These silences echoed in the empty hallways in the late afternoon, in the suppressed sighs before bed, in the lost gaze of each child who there cultivated a private dream of a place they could call home. It was in this world of painted hope and real longing that Sofia lived, a girl with large, curious eyes which seemed to harbor more questions than her age allowed her to answer. While other children ran and screamed in the courtyard, Sofia often watched the main gate, not with sadness, but with an intriguing serenity. Her heart, even young, carried the weight of a story that had begun incompletely. And amidst this routine of uncertainty, there was a single point of absolute certainty and comfort: a teddy bear. He wasn't pretty, nor was he new. His fur was frayed from being hugged so much. One eye was loose, and he smelled of dust and dried tears. But for Sofia, he wasn't just a toy. He was her anchor. He was the only witness to her arrival in this place, the only tangible link to a past she couldn't remember, but which her heart insisted on not forgetting. Every night she whispered to him her secrets, her fears, and the question that haunted her most: where did I come from? What Sofia couldn't even suspect was that the answer to her deepest question wasn't in a lost memory, but hidden right there inside her only and most precious possession. The secret that Teddy Bear held wasn't just emotional. It was physical, tangible, and it was about to be discovered. But that is a story for the next chapter. Stay here, because what comes next will change everything. The years at Home of Hope wove Sofia's life into a routine of small joys and silent memories. Her teddy bear, her constant companion, was an inseparable part of her. He had been a comfort on stormy nights, a confidant on lonely days, and the only glimpse of a past she couldn't see. It was precisely this absolute intimacy, this knowledge of every stitch, every loose thread, that made her fingers notice something different one quiet afternoon. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a flash of lightning or thunder. It was a subtle discovery, almost a whisper of fate. As she stroked the teddy bear's worn fabric, her little finger brushed against an irregularity in the stitching of an old patch located under the right ear. It was a different piece of fabric, rougher, and it felt firmer underneath. Curiosity, the same one that lived in her eyes, got the better of her. With a trembling fingernail, she pressed on that spot until the thread, old and fragile, came loose. And there, hidden within the foam, padding, there was no more cotton. There was a small secret compartment lined with a dark fabric, and inside it, something that didn't belong in that world of simple toys and donations. It was a clean, technological object made of plastic and metal. a small rectangular device the size of a large postage stamp, with a tiny LED light that blinked in a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping electronic heart. Sofia froze. What was it? Who had put it there? And why? Her childish mind tried to find another child's toy, a broken thing. But that object had an intention, a purpose. It seemed important. And from that moment on, a new question joined the others in her heart. She could no longer look at the teddy bear the same way. It was no longer just a comfort. It was an enigma. Days passed. The light continued to blink, a silent, insistent beacon in her monotonous life, until one night, filled with courage that came from deep within her soul, she decided. With trembling fingers, she removed the device from its hiding place. There were no buttons, just a small opening for a speaker. She turned it over, shook it gently, and nothing. Frustration began to set in, but then, almost as if in response to her persistence, when she pressed the object with a little more force, the LED light glowed a bright red for a second, and from it came a sound. At first, it was just a noise, hissing and distorted, like a radio out of tune. Sofia threw the receiver away in fright, but she restrained herself. And then, breaking through the static like a ghost finding its voice, came a sound that made her own heart skip a beat for a split second. It was a voice, faint, blurred by time and distance, but unmistakably human. A female voice, humming. It was a lullaby, a simple, soft melody, and deeply, agonizingly familiar. It was the same melody that had echoed in the deepest corners of her dreams for as long as she could remember. Same melody that had soothed her in nightmares, the origins of which she could never explain. This wasn't just any song. It was the song. That woman's voice was the voice her subconscious had treasured. And then the pain came. Not a physical pain, but a sharp, stabbing pang in her chest. An overwhelming wave of conflicting emotions. There was fear of the unknown, utter confusion at the thought of this impossible discovery. But most of all, there was a question that echoed like a scream in her soul, a question so painful it stole her breath. Why? Why would someone who loved her enough to hide such an elaborate, hopeful message? Why would that same person abandon her? Why would they disappear forever, leaving behind only an echo of a voice and a mystery? And that's where the story gets even deeper, because this discovery wasn't a happy ending. It was the beginning of a search. Everything Sofia thought she knew about her life crumbled in that instant. She had proof. She had a clue. But what would she do with it? How could a girl inside an orphanage decipher a mystery that seemed straight out of a movie? Sofia's journey was just beginning, and the next step involved courage she didn't even know she had, a caregiver who would become her accomplice, and a rainy night where everything, absolutely everything, would change. After the discovery of that ghost recording, Sofia's life became a constant vigil. The teddy bear was no longer a comfort, an obsession. She stared at that inert device dozens of times a day, waiting, silently begging for another sign, for one more word from that voice that was both a balm and a torture. The nights became the worst. While the other children slept, she lay staring at the small LED light that stubbornly remained off. Her heart clenched with a mixture of hope and a deep fear that this had been a one-time event, a miracle that would never be repeated. The morning in question was particularly gloomy. A spring storm had hit the city, and the wind howled like a lost soul outside the orphanage windows. Lightning streaked the sky, illuminating the dormitory full of beds for a split second, creating long, fleeting shadows that danced on the walls. The atmosphere was heavy, charged, electric. Sofia was on the verge of sleep, exhausted by anxiety, her face pressed against the teddy bear she kept hidden under the blanket. And then, at the height of nature's cacophony, it happened. A blue-white flash, more intense than all the others, illuminated the room. And it didn't come from outside. It came from under her blanket. The light from that small device, which had always blinked a calm green, now glowed an intense, urgent red, pulsing like a wounded heart, illuminating her face from bottom to top with an otherworldly light. Sofia sat bolt upright in bed, her blood running cold. The sound of the rain seemed to fade in her ears. All her attention was focused on that small rectangle of plastic that now felt alive in her hands. She hadn't touched it. She hadn't done anything. It simply woke up. And then, from the small opening of the speaker, there was no static, no lullaby. There was a voice, clear, direct, a real voice, alive in that very moment, on the other side of a connection Sofia couldn't even comprehend. It was a female voice, charged with an emotion so raw it was almost tangible, a mixture of desperate hope, fear, and a love so deep it transcended
"You're listening to
time and
this.
distance.
You're my daughter."
If the voice spoke again, even more tremulous, as if fighting back tears. "I love you." And then the last sentence, spoken with a strength and a promise that echoed in the girl's soul. "One day I'll be back." And in that instant, under the pale light of the lightning, there was no more room for doubt, for theories, for fear. Sofia knew. Every fiber of her being recognized that voice. It wasn't a dream memory. It wasn't a fantasy. It was her, the woman from the lullaby, the owner of the voice that inhabited her dreams, the person who had placed that device there in an act of desperate love. It was her mother. She was alive, and she loved her. The question, why, had not been answered. The years of abandonment were unexplained. But something fundamental had changed forever in Sofia's universe. She was no longer an orphan. She was a daughter who was wanted, a daughter who was loved. And that simple truth was more than any storm. But that was just the first message. The confirmation, the real challenge, the real journey, was just beginning, because now Sofia had a mission. How would a 12-year-old girl locked inside an orphanage respond to that message? How would she find a woman whose name, face, or location she didn't know? The search for answers was about to lead Sofia and an unlikely ally on a dangerous adventure, one that would begin with a rule breaking in the principal's office. Passed on, but the storm inside Sofia only grew stronger. The words, "One day I'll come back," echoed in her mind like a mantra, a spell that had broken the chains of resignation. She could wait no longer. Waiting meant that one day might never come. Every minute that passed was a minute further away from that voice, that truth. But the cruel, concrete reality of the orphanage still surrounded her. Locked doors, rigid rules, and a world outside she knew nothing about. Hope, however, creative resource. And Sofia had only one person to rely on. Her caregiver, Elena. She wasn't one of the distant adults. She was the young intern who always had an extra smile, repaired dolls in secret, and whose eyes still held a glint of rebellion and compassion. She walked over to her in the laundry room in a moment of rare solitude and without saying a word, placed the teddy bear and the pulsating device in her soapy hands. Elena didn't doubt it. He didn't call it a child's imagination. She saw the truth burning in Sofia's eyes, listened to the story with an open heart. In that moment, the professional caregiver disappeared, and an accomplice appeared, a big sister on an impossible mission. "We'll find out," she whispered, and those two words were the greatest act of love Sofia had ever received from an adult. The challenge was monumental. Track a fleeting transmission signal from a device no one could explain. The principal's office with its antiquated computer and dial-up internet connection was the only gateway to the world. The plan was risky, a distraction created by some children loyal to Sofia during recess, giving Elena a few precious minutes to break into the sanctum sanctorum. Every second in that room was an eternity. The computer was slow, the connection agonizing. Elena, using obscure technology and ham radio forums she'd found in a desperate search, tried to decipher the few data the device had provided, the signal frequency, the duration, until a line of green text flashed on the black screen. A rough triangulation. A town. Riverstone. A name that meant nothing to Elena, but that made Sofia let out a breathless sigh. It was a real place. She existed somewhere on the map. They had figured out the where, but now came the how. How to get there. The solution came from where they least expected it. A school trip to a museum in the neighboring town, scheduled for 3 days away. It was the perfect cover. The plan was bold, adventurous, and dangerously fragile. Get off the bus at the central bus station and, with Elena's last savings and the courage that only true desperation can provide, buy 2 tickets to Riverstone. The bus journey was a blur of green landscapes, frayed nerves, and hope. Every kilometer traveled was a kilometer back to orphanage life, a kilometer forward toward the unknown. Sofia didn't know what awaited her. She had no address, no face. She only had blind faith that thread would lead her to her final destination. And as she stepped off the bus in Riverstone, a small town adorned by hills and a river, an overwhelming sense of déjà vu hit her. It was as if her heart recognized the place before her eyes did. Following the only logical clue that the broadcast needed a high vantage point to reach the desired range, they climbed the town's highest hill, where a small square with an old lookout point offered a 360-degree view. And then there was an almost imperceptible movement. On the bench at the end of the square, sitting alone, was a woman. She didn't look like a tourist. She looked like someone on vigil, someone waiting. And on her lap, protected with a care that was visible even from a distance, was a teddy bear, worn with age with a patch under its right ear. Just like hers, the world stopped. The sound of the wind, the cars, the city. Everything disappeared. In the woman's eyes, which turned slowly as if feeling the weight of Sofia's gaze, was an entire story of pain, regret, and a stubborn hope that had never, ever died. They were filled with tears that had not yet fallen, perfectly mirroring the ones now streaming freely down Sofia's face. She didn't need to say a word. The teddy bear in the woman's lap was the password, the final confirmation. The proof that this wasn't madness, but a miracle. At 12 years old, after a journey of pure courage, Sofia hadn't just found a place on the map. She had found her safe haven. She had finally found her mother. But that was the reward, the achievement. But what about the price? What about the consequences? Why did her mother do what she did? What dark secrets and dangers from the past will this long-awaited reunion reveal? Sofia and her mother's story is just beginning, and the next chapter is the most chilling of all. The reunion is beautiful, but the mystery remains. Why was she abandoned? Comment what you think happened. The truth will be revealed in the final video, so you don't miss it. The space between them, which was only meters, seemed to represent the 12 years they had lived apart. But there was no hesitation. There was no doubt. With teary eyes and her heart beating in a unique rhythm of anxiety and certainty, Sofia took the first step, and then another, and another, until she stood there before that woman whose face was a map of contradictory emotions: joy, fear, relief, and a pain as ancient as it was profound. The woman stood up, slowly as if moving in a dream, holding the teddy bear against her chest. She didn't smile. She surrendered. And when Sofia's arms, still so small but incredibly strong, wrapped around her waist, and when the girl's face buried in her shoulder, a wave of absolute peace swept away all the anguish, all the fear, all the waiting. And in that embrace, Sofia understood everything without a single word being spoken. She felt in the trembling hands that held her, in the hot tears that wet her hair, and in the deep, liberating sigh that escaped that woman's chest, that true love is this, a stubborn force that accepts no never again. It is a flame that hides beneath the ashes of suffering, but never, ever, ever goes out. This love had not given up on her. It had waited, hidden inside a modest toy, beating silently like a heart of hope, until fate could finish the work it had begun. Those hidden messages weren't technology. They were prayers in the form of radio waves. That toy wasn't closed. It was a time capsule filled with the purest love. They were the invisible bridge that fate, with moving precision, built across the abyss of fear, separation, and pain. Two lives torn in half by cruel circumstance were now being stitched back together, joined by an invisible thread that time had been unable to sever. And Sofia understood the most valuable lesson of all, that hope doesn't scream. It doesn't appear in spotlights or grand gestures. Often it's hidden in the simplest and most neglected places. It's in the gaze of an abandoned animal, in the gesture of a stranger, in the handshake of someone offering help. It was hidden in the heart of a teddy bear. All it takes is the courage to look beyond the obvious. All it takes is to silence the noise of the world and listen with your heart. The story of Sofia and her mother is not about betrayal. It's about redemption. It's not about abandonment, but about reunion. It's living proof that no matter how dark the path gets, no matter how many walls are erected, love always finds a way